Hi, Bassel. Hi, Uday. Thanks for getting on to the daily updates. I'm going to cover off on East Asia Pacific and then I'll swing it over to you chaps. Firstly, in East Asia Pacific, today we've covered one issue that we've assessed in Seoul, South Korea, and 40 other issues in East Asia Pacific region. Ignoring COVID, I'll cover off one of those. And on top of that, we've also produced a detailed list of incidents from Myanmar, and I'll just touch off on Myanmar separately at the end. In South Korea, workers protested. About 200 migrant workers and civic activists held a protest march in Seoul. They gathered in front of the Bosingak Pavilion in Jongno district. They were demanding better working and living conditions and the freedom to switch jobs and get some more worker rights. North Asia, in China, 4 people died and 8 were injured after a highway bridge collapsed in Hubei province. Also in Hong Kong, pro-Chinese establishment candidates claimed all 20 seats in Hong Kong's legislative election. The results from the 10 constituencies were announced this morning. The Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong emerged as the biggest winner, with its candidates winning in each of the 10 constituencies that it contested. In South Korea, also, authorities issued a heavy snow advisory in the Greater Seoul area. In Taiwan, voters supported the position of President Tsai Ing-wen's administration on all 4 issues in a referendum on December 18. The referendum was on 4 issues related to the banning of imports of pork that contained a certain additive, the relocation of a liquefied natural gas terminal project, also the resuming of the construction of a nuclear power plant in New Taipei City. And also the 4th one was the holding of the referendums at the same time as elections. Basically, the Progressive Party had called on voters to say no to all questions, which they did. Swinging over to Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, authorities are pursuing a soldier who fled with an assault rifle in Papua. The soldier ran away on 17 of December. Almost comically, the authorities are investigating the motive behind the incident. Like, wow, I'm guessing perhaps he was an indigenous Papuan soldier, and we could probably extrapolate beyond the needs to have an investigation into what has been an anti or a repressive central government not respecting human rights. So I don't think there's a bewilderment about that. In both Western Sumatra and Northern Sumatra, there have been very heavy floodings in Indonesia. Back to Papua, suspected West Papua National Liberation Army members surrendered to security forces in the Yapen Islands, which is up north of the mainland. Authorities in Indonesia also said that 4 terrorists arrested in Batam on December 16 were members of Jemaah Islamiyah. At least 3 of the suspects were involved in fundraising activities. The 9 terrorists arrested in Medan in North Sumatra on the same day are also suspected to be Jemaah Islamiyah members. Now, interesting to note here, obviously Sumatra and Batam straddle Singapore, so read that into it what you wish. In Malaysia, the GPS, or the Gabungan Party Sarawak coalition, won 75 out of the 82 seats in the Sarawak Assembly elections in December 18. Uday, I think that'd be fair to say that that's going to help the existing government. Would you have a comment on that?
Yeah, Paul. The GPS is aligned with Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin's government, so this is a win for them. The opposition didn't really show up much for these elections, so yep.
Gotcha. Also in Malaysia, 34,000 people have been evacuated because of floods across 8 states. In the Philippines, 12 members of the Bangsamoro Islamic freedom fighters surrendered to the military in Ampantuan and Guindanao. If you want more information on that, contact us. Also, Mactan Cebu International Airport will allow international flights to start landing again after Typhoon Rai. Power is also expected to be restored in Cebu within a week. In Singapore held emergency meetings with critical information sectors over potential threats coming from the Log4j vulnerability. That vulnerability exposes servers to interception by outside actors. The country's cybersecurity agency has put out alerts and is said to be closely monitoring all developments. It's very important to note that the convoluted approach that the banks and the government use for security and cybersecurity in Singapore tends to make them over-reliant on having too many people, too much policy, too much framework, and perhaps many of the wrong kind of managers where they're all operating in independent silos, and the lack of integration between physical security, cyber security, and the policymakers, and keeping up with the latest methods to prevent and deter attacks. Frankly, Singapore's going to continue to have a series of problems, which it's had sort of infinitum over the last 3 or 4 years with major hacks. One notable one, the Public Health Authority was hacked, compromising a lot of people's medical records, but there's 30 incidents I could quote off the top of my head. In Thailand, authorities sent back over 600 refugees to Myanmar, and in the Australia and Pacific Islands in New Zealand, a man was injured in a shooting in a public car park, again in Auckland's Central Business District. These are becoming quite frequent, so it's worth making sure you do specific awareness training with your personnel in New Zealand, because it's not at all skiing and rugby there. There is significant crime underlying what is a very friendly nation to visit. In Myanmar, and again, this is an entire daily report in its own, but I'll just cover off again. Clashes between the military and the Karen National Union in the KN state, approximately 50 Tatmadaw soldiers. Now this is huge. This is a couple of platoons, including 2 company commanders, were killed in clashes in KN state. The Tatmadaw clashed with a coalition of the Karen National Liberation Army and local People's Defences Force in the Mayawati area. Dozens of security personnel were killed in clashes with resistance groups elsewhere in the country, notably in Sagaing region. At least 35 Tatmadaw soldiers and a police officer were killed in several attacks since December 17. In Yangon, explosions recorded between December 17 and yesterday, and we're talking several explosions. 3 Tatmadaw soldiers were killed in an attack using explosives in an outpost in Kayan on December 17. Also, 3 resistance fighters were killed when Tatmadaw soldiers raided an outpost of the Danyin PDF. So notably, if you have people or footprint or business operations in Myanmar, you probably need to, at minimum, engage our Myanmar report. Just summarising, civilian deaths are now at about 1,700. Estimated security force deaths at about 4,900, closing in on 4,900, and COVID-19 deaths 19,220, and that's direct from the virus, not ensuing things such as suicides from economic ruin caused by the somewhat zealous lockdowns that may perhaps be also involving keeping civil powers in check. So please go ahead, and if you could cover off on South Asia. Uday.
Thanks, Paul. So in South Asia, today we covered 1 major development and 23 other developments. So as a major, we talked about the violence during the civic body elections in Kolkata, West Bengal, and India. Now, we had already assessed this violence before, and political motivated violence is quite common in the state, especially between especially over tensions between the state government and the national government in India. Also in India, about 3,000 workers of Foxconn, which is a Taiwanese iPhone manufacturer, blocked the Chennai-Bangalore road in protest for 16 hours. They have protested over various issues before, and the blockade was eventually ended after several rounds of talks. If we go to Tamil Nadu, the main opposition party staged demonstrations against the ruling party across the state yesterday, including in Chennai. Moving over to Pakistan, most of the developments we've covered today are related to terrorism across Pakistan, mainly concentrated in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and there were also some arrests of Tehreek-e-Taliban and Islamic State terrorists in Punjab. If we go over to Bangladesh, activists of the Bangladesh Chhatra League blocked the Dhaka-Mawa Expressway in Munshiganj yesterday. They were protesting after they were denied posts in a newly announced college committee. And this just goes to show the frequency and the scale of disruptions at most protests in Dhaka, where arterial roads and highways will be blocked. Now, if we go over to Afghanistan, more of the same, but interestingly, the Pakistan Taliban, or the TTP, which I mentioned before, claimed that Pakistan launched a drone strike targeting a senior TTP leader in Kunar, Afghanistan, on December 16th. Now, the missile failed to explode, and this comes after a ceasefire ended between the TTP and the Pakistan government, so this does not bode well for the security situation in the region. And clients can contact us if they want to know more. We'll be covering some of this in our briefing tomorrow, Paul, so just to give everyone an idea. But I think that's it from South Asia for me. I think, Bassel, if you could cover Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Yes, thank you, Uday. In the EMEA region, we have over 45 developments today. It seems that in Europe, lockdowns are coming back, especially in the Netherlands. The government authorities in the Netherlands imposed the lockdown until January 24. Stores, restaurants, bar will all be closed. Interestingly, also protests continue in Europe, especially against vaccinations. We can see that in Belgium, thousands of protesters marched in the Gare du Nord in Belgium against vaccinations. In Germany, the government authorities put France and Denmark as high-risk zones, which means travelers from these two countries, especially unvaccinated, should go under quarantine for 5 days. In Spain, thousands of Catalans protested against a new mandate by the court, demanding additional Spanish in all the schools. 25% of all subjects should be taught in Spanish. In Ukraine, a soldier was killed and another one was injured in clashes between the Ukrainian military and pro-Russian separatists. If we go over to the Middle East, in Iraq, two Islamic State members were killed by airstrikes by the Iraqi Air Force on December 18. Also, two Katyusha rockets were targeted on the Green Zone. They fell near the US Embassy in the Green Zone. If we go over to Yemen, over 100 Houthi rebels were killed by airstrikes from the Saudi-led coalition, especially in Marib and Al Jauf. In North Africa, in Tunisia, protests continue against President Kais Saied. They're accusing him of a coup. And yesterday, there were clashes between the security forces and protesters from the initiative Citizens of the Coup. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, President Felix Tshisekedi extended the state of siege, especially on North Kivu province and Ituri province, for 15 days. At least 162 militiamen also surrendered to the MONUSCO forces, which is the UN stabilization mission in the DRC. Our major today was about Sudan. Also, violent protests continue in Sudan. At least 123 people were injured yesterday during clashes between security forces and protesters. This is it from the EMEA region.
Excellent. Look, thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Look forward to tomorrow's brief, and excellent work as always. Cheerio, chaps.